kind of known the idea of whatever you want to call it, experimental documentary or
Well,
whatever.
yeah,
Okay.
for quite some time.
Interesting.
But
What I like very much about the film is that it has this hypnotic quality that, you know, I like films that make you think. There are not too many films that make you think, don't reveal everything. So what I love about it is that, as I was watching it, is I don't only experience a lot of emotions, so it makes me think about Heidegger and makes me think about how urbanism is destroying, how he was talking about urbanism destroying the individuality of the people. And it takes me from there on the roller coaster down, makes me think about these opposite forces that are at work in us at all time. And then I can feel her emotions that you somehow succeed to build up, and this will be my question. I don't want to just kind of diverging here, but I wanted to express that before I'm asking you a question. And there's a sensorial, as you said, it's a sensual film. You're watching it and you feel her emotions, but you also feel what the images are impregnating you with. I had moments when I felt tired, but relaxed. Tired in a way that I was relaxed and I could listen, and I felt moments of anxiety, which I think she was experiencing going through this entire thing. And I thought, you've done it masterfully. You know, when Ned recommended the film, and I watched it on my computer the first time, and you said, oh, don't watch on your computer, it's not going to have the same effect. I contradict you. I was tired when I arrived home. I had to deal with my kid who was all around me, jumping around and distracting me and all that. And I put it on my computer expecting to see something pretentious, annoyingly pretentious, because I'm sorry. This is how I felt, because it was, transcribed very fast, to me, It was explained very fast.
Yeah.
So it's something with beautiful images, with a lot of, sounds. The first thing that, comes to is like, it's going to be this pretentious experimental film that I'm not going to get anything out of it and probably don't like, okay? I'm getting home from my computer, turned it on, said, okay, oh, Ned sent me this link, let's watch it. All right, and my kid is around, and I'm hypnotized. I'm hypnotized by not only the beauty of the images, because I'm not so much into believing in images in themselves without any other context. I'm hypnotized by her voice, by what she says, by the fact that she's talking continuously. My son is screaming in one corner, and I'm like annoyed that I cannot hear every single word and absorb it. And I didn't think I would resist through the whole thing, but I was captivated.
So thank you very much for your comments. So again, it's like there's this field that's been opened up. So it's not just about what's being thrown at you, but there's a space to navigate things not only between you and the screen, but also what you're feeling in yourself. So this word that I only recently discovered, haptic, I don't know if you've heard it, in the writings of Laura Marx and many others, in the sense that, things become tactile. Cinema has the ability to, depending on how, again, what strategies you employ, formal ones, to articulate or consecrate? Congregate, I'm missing a word. But anyway, to make concrete, what's being said, then it's not just about what's happening up there, but there's like a dynamic relationship happening, and it's so important. I mean, this is being, experimental film didn't start in the 60s or the 40s. It started side by side with the Malays right from the beginning, or with the two brothers of the tree. Yeah, right. There was always experimentation and manipulation going on all the time. So why do we forsake that in the name of transparency and suspension of disbelief? It's not about art for art's sake. It's just about how can I mine the possibilities. And a lot of this, almost none of this was prefigured too. You really have to think about what can the film give you. And if you notice, a lot of this embodiment comes because the film is speaking. I tried to exploit things that were happening in the picture and connect them so that when she took a breath, the film was breathing, and make beats of the music connect to beats of the imagery. Or when she says something, when she's talking about the psych ward, and not when the silent part, but later, and she says the word, God, I can't remember what she said, but I just had timed it so that this word was fell over when the light opened up.
Right.
So it's just like really, you know, I can't figure those things out. You know, the script's sort of written on the wind. And one of my most revered film professors years ago said that making a film is like raising a child or a garden. Sometimes you just have to walk away and let it grow on its own. So,
Can I ask the question, because I know I talked a lot and it didn't make a lot of sense.
Okay.
I want to ask you, how did you actually arrive at the script? Because this is driving your film forward.
Right.
And it's just so articulate. It's just so perfect. And it almost, because I asked you yesterday, is she actually the one reading something, or, you know?
no, she's not reading it. That's the way she speaks.
Well, I
Did you transcribe everything?
is this, how did you work with her to get all that material?
Well, you know, I just I wrote questions.
Mhm.
And you know, sort of like you were saying, try to find that balance between you know, it not feeling like an interview, but just trying to engage her in conversation.
How many hours of that conversation did you have?
Altogether, I'd say it was 9 hours.
And how
7 or
difficult
9.
was it? Because it sounds like everything is done in one piece and it's clearly not.
Well, of course, that's where the art comes in.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I edited 9 hours, 7 hours, I can't remember, of interviews down to probably spoken 20 minutes. But, you know, then I just went through, I transcribed everything, every single word. And that's a way of becoming intimate with the footage. And then whenever something, I had a star system of 4 stars, 3 stars, 2, and 1. And whenever there was a sentence or thought that I really liked, I would put those stars. And then, after it was completely linear in the way it was recorded, then I went back and I started cutting and pasting into theme and subject areas. And then putting them in the order in which the 4 stars, you know, or what I kept in the 3 stars. And sometimes, you know how it is in film, you can have something that's really poor visually or audibly, whatever, but depending on what becomes before and after, it's lifted, you know. But you really gotta, one thing you really gotta teach the kids is to kill their darlings. I have that, you know, written above my editing bay. I have only the best of the best. You have to love every shot. That's why I can watch this damn thing over and over again. I love it. It has nothing to do with ego. It's just I try to make a film that I'll never look at it and say I would have done one single frame differently. It's perfect. And that's a lot because I let go of a lot, you know.
And
I mean,
how will you look at it when you're 54?
when I'm 54,
Oh, I'm 62.
not that far away.
Will you love every single frame?
Well,
when
I
you're
don't,
60?
I can't even, you know, everything, I feel like, even though this is my 8th film, it's my first film. And it's my first film because it's the first one, like I said earlier, that I made for other people. So, but, you know,
Call
I
me.
don't, I'll always love this film. What's that?
Call me.
Call you what?
When you're 62.
Oh, and we'll talk. Okay,
I'm curious about her reaction to it.
great question. Yeah, and actually, and this is a really good question in the context of what you're doing, because it's, a lot of people said, you know, how much input did she have? And I say none. You know, I got the release, although I did something very different. Usually, you know, right, you get the release from the beginning, day one, that I have, you know, as the director, final cut, as it's called, and I didn't do that, and probably largely out of naivete, because it was my first documentary, but mainly because she saw me as the media. She didn't know me as a fellow traveler with my own relative struggles, and she didn't know me as an artist or as a human being, if I can separate that from the other things, just as someone who wanted something from her and started as a thesis project, no less. So I spent a year getting to know her and having just interviews over lunch or whatever. And so she came to trust me and was telling me things that she told me she never told anyone else before. You know, God knows why, but I think she just obviously really likes to speak. She likes the sound of her own voice. So that was good. And it was really hard for her to see this at first, because here she was, she didn't see it until 2 weeks before the premiere. She kept putting up and putting it off, and then to sit there, the theater was filled, every seat in the theater, 300 seats. And there she was, you know, in the midst of that, seeing, you know, her face large, and the screen, it was literally 10 times larger than this. So it was really hard for her at first. I mean, all these intimate details of her life. But I think it's also because of the strength of the film, too. You know, she was sort of re-inhabiting a lot of things. But again, there's that whole thing that how can you do it compassionately without pulling your punches, as it were?
You could have as easily, and, don't, but you could have, transcribed that script and given it to an actress, because we don't really see the person's face except at the very beginning.
And what would be the
I don't know,
gesture behind that?
I was just playing with, all the possibilities for how you could have.
But something must have inspired that. I mean, I'm just curious what, it just popped up.
Yeah, it just popped up as,
Okay.
like, that would have been another way of giving her a layer of distance from
Yeah.
it, had she needed it.
There couldn't be anything less that I'd want to do.
Right,
It's her story. It needs to be told in her words, and I want the
And her
nuances of
voice.
her voice, and
yeah.
and her point where you almost hear the tears in her voice. Yeah.
I'm so glad that you made the connection with Lois and that Ned had you back. And I'm glad you're here. I'm not surprised the film has had tremendous success. I very much appreciated the film, enjoyed the film. I can talk about technical things up and down and that I'm impressed with.
We can talk about that later tonight.
Yeah, we can do that. What I want to say is this, is that for me, there's much for me to learn in this piece from it. So I'm going to watch it again. I will share it with students. Going against literal or reality, or you said earlier you're talking about suspension of disbelief. How about this suspension of belief? So I'm just thrilled. I think there'll be much here for me personally as a teacher, and for me to share with my students about how we can treat our subject matter with respect, with images, with imagery, rethinking imagery.
Good.
So I'm like ready to still kind of go with this and learn
I'm so
more.
glad to hear that. Because that's why I'm here. I mean, I really appreciate the accolades. I really do. I never take them for granted. I'm very, very grateful for it. But that's not why I'm here. I know it's a good film. It's because of what it can do.
Yeah.
And what it can inspire in other makers, and how that can trickle down to your students. It just, I'm turning 50 in 2 weeks. And I've
It's all right,
spent
we're
my.
guilty.
You'll
get
through it.
50's good.
I'm trying to put into context here is that I'm trying to say I've had such a chip on my shoulder, for most of my adult life about, what constitutes success in film, even though I've been really clear since almost the day I arrived in San Francisco and saw, Stan Brakhage in person showing Dog Starman, and saw The Color of My Soul. I know that sounds a little hyperbolic, but some hyperbole, but it's not. He gave me pictures for the ineffable, but yet still I was raised in a culture that says if you're a filmmaker, you go to Hollywood. So all my life I've sort of been struggling with trying to figure out how to find this balance, and now I'm making a sustainable, barely, but I actually make my living off this film. So now I make enough money off of this, doing these presentations and selling DVDs, that now I've got a Kickstarter project where I'm making a mental health trilogy, and there's so much demand for the film, I'm translating it into 5 languages. Oh, don't let me forget, I said yesterday, I completely forgot, I've got to give you, I'll send it to Ned and you can pass it on. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to share with everyone the response of the students after we showed it. I mean, you were there, but there was nobody in the class that had ever seen anything like that. They had no frame of reference. It was like, what just happened? But then they started, I don't know whether you remember, Ken, but they started to articulate why they liked it, and it was so different than this conversation that we're having.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like, the birds were neat the way they kept coming back. Well, we're talking on another level.
Yeah.
But they had some very insightful ideas, and as the conversation went on, they were sparked to come up with reasons why it appealed to them, not at the level perhaps that we're discussing it. Some of them thought it was too long, it was boring here and there, because you get the reality. But what Ken doesn't know is that the next week when that class met, and they had a week to think about it, we had another discussion.
Exactly.
And that discussion was very different. After thinking about it, they had taken it kind of up where we're looking at it. And that's what blew my mind away, is it didn't go away, they didn't forget about it.
They just had no context, they didn't have the
Yeah.
vocabulary, and that's what we have to do with our students.
You see, we can create that context. That's not a problem, and
Yes.
I'm more than willing to do so. Now, what about the audience who's gonna need to watch that? Do they have the context? If they come
Well,
up with
like
an
I said,
idea?
I've screened this, I've set out to make a film that would reach, that would speak, that would be accessible to as broad a demographic as possible. I've been in so many different contexts, old, young, professional, consumer, survivors, you know. I've been in psych wards with it, I've been in jails with it, you know, and it just has this shape-shifting quality. Even formally, I could cut this up, throw it up in the air, and come down in any order, and it will still work. Obviously not, I mean, I made choices, I wasn't that arbitrary. But the point is, there's just something intrinsic about working with metaphors versus, you know, literal representation that allows people to navigate the film in a way that internalizes it in the way you were speaking. Yeah.
I've used a lot of J. Roosevelt's films in classes, and what I found about this, in a very similar way, that's why I said it, I don't mean it as a anything other than, but, you know, I have learned to meditate, and this is a very much, it puts you in a meditative state. And in that state, if you look at about what happens with people, is that it doesn't surprise me that it took them a week to come back and have a reaction, because, you know, you're in that state, and unless you know that, you know, it opens certain things about it, and that you have to have time to reflect on it. And so I'm sure you get a lot of, it would be interesting that you would get a lot of experiences with this, that's what social media would be great, that people would have away from the experience.
Yes. You
And-
have the gamut, the whole gamut.
That's a good
Yeah,
point.
it's very.
I also forgot, I wrote a
good
set of
point.
educational guidelines for how people can speak about this. Very important, you should also think about this. You know, what you can provide, it can be on the website, downloadable, a set of, and I have for each area, you know, aesthetic things, political things, things about Jax, and their questions, just, you know, study guides. So I'll have this all emailed to you as well.
But I think,
I'm sorry if I cut you off. Go on.
I'm just saying that I would think that with this, because it's a thing that, because of all of those physical things that happen, it allows people, and also the use of metaphors, and it's like poetry, you know, you know, you made a choice to be a poet and to be, you know, I know you don't like to be categorized, because that's very clear here, but, you know, I see it as poetry, you know, versus,
Whatever.
you know, a nonfiction short story, and in that has different layers of how that
Yes.
art affects us versus something else, and it's really very beautiful, and I would say with it is that you as a maker, and because we have this ability to do that now, have to look at not only the experience of the screening or the experience of the viewing, but the after effect.
Absolutely.
You know, and actually having the opportunity to re-engage with
That's
it.
what's so exciting about what we're all doing here. This is not see it, leave the theater. You take this with you, and you can travel with it, and you're every time I see it, I'm different. There's nothing better for my mental health than to have made this film. You had a question too. I don't want to forget your question.
I need a minute.
Okay, yeah, sorry.
How did you discover your subject, and was your original vision what the film turned into, or did it become something different?
Well, yeah, it always changes, but I will say I've never been so thoroughly inseminated with an idea as this one, where what I so closely visualized from the outset resembled the final film. There were definitely changes, and how I found it was I just discovered their first publication, Icarus Project's first publication, which just happened to be laying around the house.
Oh.
I would not be sitting here right now if she hadn't put her stories and those others into words. It didn't even belong to a roommate, it was a house guest. And the
It
way
was
she,
not an accident.
divine intervention.
Meant to be.
You know, it was just, oh, I see what you're saying. Right. Well, I like the word accident though. The way she spoke, words again, the way she spoke about her experiences, metaphorically and in terms of content and the form, it was so close. You know, I've never received a diagnosis but her language gave me a language, just like Stan Brackage's gave me a visual language. I got it, and that inspired the film. It was almost more the way she said what she said than what she said. And all her artwork is like a step ahead of mine. In terms of, when I say ahead, I don't mean in terms of value. I mean, it's just like out of my reach from what it's like it came out of me. So when you see that second slide of her paintings, and you can see the birds on the telephone wire.
Right.
I mean, we're just obsessed with very similar things, in light. So it's just a very synchronous fit.
I love what she says. I mean, I have a brother that has mental illness, and I just love that. I always thought growing up with him that if the world was a different place, he would have found a place, And it's just a beautiful, 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 very, I agree with her. Her words are just really, thoughtful and just, I don't know how to describe it, just on point, and what you chose, obviously, out of 9 hours, in that, to tell whatever you wanted to tell was very much in sync with the story that you wanted to tell.
The edited itself, it was amazing how quickly it came together, something like 2 weeks, I was very, very particular about creating a catalog. Every single shot was so carefully iterated in terms of what it was, what it looked like, at what frame are the birds entering, which corner rather of the frame, and its location. So I had, a book this thick, and I had, all the moon shots, and all the sunballs, and then different kinds of sunballs. So anytime I needed something, I was very quickly able to access it and immediately see if it was right. I think you had a question, yeah.
Did you just say that the birds on the power lines were a coincidence, that she had a visual that was like that?
Well, we both liked them, yeah.
Okay.
So yes, we were both drawn to them apart from one another, knowing that. But it's such a good metaphor, you see, this whole Icarus metaphor,
It's metaphoric yet accessible, that's what I like about it. It's accessible, it's easy to.
Yes. Yeah, and see, so there's that, that
No, sure.
impulse, that iteration, that over-iteration that Hollywood does, it's like, I'm going to tell, it just drives me crazy, or just any films that, exactly what is being said, that's exactly what you see.
What you see.
It's redundant,
Right.
it's not slippery, there's no gap, it's like, why am I even here?
Have you seen Andrew Godwicki's Rivers and?
Oh, yeah,
Yes.
huge. When I
So-
saw that, sorry, Ned, just one more second.
No,
I mean,
sure.
when I saw that film, it was disquieting insofar as, you ever get that sense when you see something and you feel like your fire was stolen? And you know what it was in that film? Remember, after he would say something, the filmmaker let the camera
It's him.
linger. The filmmaker let the camera linger so that you had time to let the last thing that was said echo over the shot. That was so brilliant, and this is something before, it was something like 3 years before I, first been inspired to make this film. And but yet, it's like a baby, it's sort of like that idea of like a child's trying to find a body to be born in, and that Crooked Beauty was already in me somewhere. I could feel the rhythm of it starting to kick in my belly even before I had the inspiration to make the film. And that film, in those shots, in those moments, articulated that. So that's why there's a lot of times where you see like these pregnant, pardon the term, extended, shot. It would just keep going on for 4 beats. I used to play trumpet, so I understand key signature. So I always cut with the 4/4 key signature, always. Yeah.
Well, I remember something you said when you were talking to the students, and I know when Vertov was making a Man with a Movie Camera,
Yeah.
he shot it all and handed it to his wife, and she edited the entire thing. He never even looked at it. And when you said, I could throw it up in the air and it could all come down and it would still work. And I remember when you were saying that you were shooting a lot of the imagery not connected to the transcript, but you were just out shooting. And when you saw something
Yes.
visual, you shot it,
Yes.
and then it made its way into the film.
Good.
As opposed to using the transcript as an index.
I'm so glad you brought that up. Can I
Yeah.
talk about that a little bit?
Sure.
I feel very, very
You have a
passionate
minute
about
now.
this.
No,
Huh?
I'm just kidding.
I feel very, very passionate about this. When I saw a tree blowing in the wind, that to me was not the wind blowing the tree. That was the tree saying, come here. That was the animate world speaking to us. You know, I'm a big fan of this author, David Abrams, who's going to be one of the people I interview for my short feature doc on touch. And he speaks in his new book on becoming animal, and his first book from the 90s, Spell of the Sensuous, about how literacy for us is what's inscribed on the page, and how far we've come from when literacy, the narrative, was inscribed in the animate, you know, the topography of the world as the page, if you were. So I like this idea of this, and I talk about this in the essay I gave you. So I like the idea of the script being written on the wind and being called to things. Now, like Ned said, I didn't sit there and say, all right, she's saying this, I need to go out and find it. But I read that script over and over and over. I can't tell you how many times I read it. It was inside of me. So when I felt the call to shoot something, it wasn't so much it was aesthetically. I mean, yes, well, there was obviously an aesthetic element, but there's something deeper. There's a sensibility, an animate. There's a communication. It's that the philosopher.
Which one were you talking about?
Yeah, the whole thing, phenomenology.
Phenomenal.
Yeah, look, who's the guy? Who's the philosopher, though? Anyway, well, this whole idea that you know, a tree isn't there's an animate quality to it, and there's you have a dynamic, active conversation with everything around you, and we're raised in a culture where that is a thing that's separate from us, but it's not. We grew up in an environment, our senses evolved in relationship to them, so we're not separate from them. So over the course of shooting the film, you know, I really became like, reclaimed the wild and the primitive. And these, when I saw a bird on the wire, wow, they were like on the top of a you know, a wind thing on top of the barn, because the birds love the fog. So I learned to know when the fog was rolling in and when the birds got up. Maybe they liked the precipitation on their face. I don't know. So this whole new relationship with the world was activated. See, for me, being on a traditional film set is akin to a psych ward. Because what do you do on a traditional film set, right? You're in the union, and everyone, you know, if you're an electrician, don't you dare, you know, ask if you could pull focus, you know, or anything like that. And you just got to sit there. And I just hated doing that, you know, in school when I had to do that. And it wasn't lost in me, as I mentioned, I think, in the essay, that there was sort of, over the course of editing the film, this really pointed and insidious parallel between Hollywood and Big Pharma, because both privilege, power, and profit over insight and integration, right? So, you know, I wanted to turn that upside down, you know, and so my dojo, my soundstage, was outside. It was not controlled. So you see, I couldn't tell the sun to sit and wait while I sussed out, you know, the best angle for the shadow falling, because it was constantly changing. So you see, there's a dynamic, there's a relationship. I was at the behest of it. It's very, very liberating and very exciting. I would go out one day and spend a whole day, 8-10 hours, and I wouldn't find a single shot, and I'd be so angry and upset. But then there'd be another day where I got tons of shots, or there'd be another day where I was shooting, but I didn't use any of them. But or I felt like I wouldn't, and I got just one shot, and I just knew, like that one sprinkler shot. It was so exciting. I would go, I had a friend who was a photographer, we'd just drive around in the car, and as I say in the essay, I moved to places that are at the margins, you know, of urban, and the whole film privileges opposites as a parallel to the extremes of mania and depression. So it was black and white, highlight and shadow, fast and slow, urban and natural, rough textures and smooth textures. So we'd go like to the Delta, you know, in North Bay in San Francisco, you know, right where, you know, places that were once fruit stands that had been only in the last 10 years completely paved over, where my friend used to go buy her produce. And now, you know, the earth was just paved over. So like the earth was crying. Or I go to Detroit, I shot in Detroit, in all what were called feral homes, as one photographer calls them, where you have nature intruding. So I even went and shot in a lot of abandoned psych wards, but all the stuff didn't come out when I went to those places. Those places did not want to be in the film, so that's why they came out of focus. There were spirits there, whatever, not to get all, you know, wow, you know, what's the term? Woo-woo, thank you. Wow. but that works too. But you know, I just felt unsettled in those places, and this is not the kind of film I wanted to make. You know, I wanted to again take it out of the head and make it not just about biochemistry. I mean, there are those aspects, but to make it accessible, to say that, you know, there's grace in madness. It's ground into the world. You know, there's madness there's a social condition, but there's also a natural animate one too. You know, that whole yin yang thing. I mean, you need these forces of light and dark swirling together. I mean, that's.
Are you willing to accept that you're an artist and not necessarily a filmmaker?
Oh yeah, I love that. You know, an artist who
Because
works in
you're
film,
talking.
but-
I mean, you know,
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking
Fine.
out of the context of how you found your way in it, and that's how artists work.
Can I add something to that? A filmmaker is an artist
Well, I
in the
do.
medium of film.
Yeah. Well, I agree.
So-
I agree.
You were going to say?
Yeah, I have a question about, and I'm sorry, I had to run off for
That's
just
all
a
right.
minute, so I apologize if I missed this. Did you talk at all about, you mentioned something about not using, focus on the subject's case or the speaking subject as a way of not re-traumatizing the person who had the traumatic experience, but also not traumatizing the audience?
Well, I was speaking about. I'm sorry. Finish your question.
When you did your introduction,
Yes.
I think, did I understand?
Not quite, but I mean, you sort of
Okay.
conflated a little bit, just a little though. I was just saying that by showing the speaking subject on screen, it was less about traumatizing them, because if we're talking
Right.
about something traumatizing, that could
Yeah.
be triggering whether or not they're on screen. But there was an othering quality to that. You know, it's all about her if you see her. It has nothing to do with us, it's her story.
Right.
So I wanted to open a space where people could use her story as a touchstone for our own struggles or those we know. Because let's face it, you know, we all struggle. To be human, we're meant to struggle. You know, we've all thought, you know, be it breaking up with a lover, or, you know, losing your job, or we're at war, you know, for how many years now? All these things make us think about being a bridge statistic at one time or another, or just, you know, being in touch with feeling mad, you know, in their own relative way. And that meant opening up a space as opposed to being all just about her. So my point, though, about re-triggering the audience was just about, again, how am I going to show it? You know, am I going to do what he did in Tarnation, which is very, very triggering?
Yeah.
Was that graphic stylistic excess, you know? And
Right.
how can you make something compassionate, but is still not romantic? You know,
Yeah.
anyway, too. I didn't want to do that. I did not want to make this about the mad genius. And that's, you know, there's a 3-act structure here. I got an inciting incident, I got
Right.
pushback, and everything. And when I had, after the premiere, I had to find my fine cut, like all my homies come and say, rip it apart, tell me what I need, because it just doesn't feel right at the end. And it got too nice at the end. You know, after 2 hours of struggling and struggling, finally, thank God, 10 minutes before we abandoned the night, my buddy said, you know, we need to know how she's still struggling at the end. And that's the point where you see the crane going, and she says, I still feel like the magic carpet could be pulled out for me. I'm like, when he said that, I said, I know exactly what I'm going to put in.
Yeah.
And I put that there, and that was it. I knew it was done. So, you know, it's a subtle arc, but there is an arc, you know? So, again, I didn't want to make it just experimental in all the cliched ways, just stylistic excess, or just form as content. I really wanted to say, you know, I'm a mature artist now, and I really want to think about how I can shape something that will carry people through, you know?
Ken, it's great, but we gotta wrap.
Thank you.
Very cool.
That's fine. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ken.
Thank you.
And we can keep talking.
Good.
I'm very, very available. And what I mean is, anyone can write or call me at any time to talk more about this, or just, there's nothing I like better than talking to people about their creative challenges and obstacles in film. I just so love it. That's why my Kickstarter project, one of my rewards is actually consultation. So if anyone wants to call me at any point to talk about what's going on with your students or anything, I'm totally there.